Hey guys, I guess I'm back, and today I present you the top 10 464 Hudson, a video that I have been wanting to do for a while, and I think now it's the perfect time for that. So without further ado, let's begin, shall we? Actually, before we begin, I want to say that I'm very sorry that this video took ages. I began working on it all the way back in May, but for whatever reason I just never got around until right now, so yeah, sorry about that. Anyways, let's start. The 464 Hudson Type wheel arrangement came into existence in 1911 in France with their two 4-cylinder locos. At first it was called the Baltic Type, but when New York Central built their first 464 number 5200, the New York Central president at that time, Paul Kiefer, decided to call them Hudsons after the Hudson River that ran next to the water level route, and the design was so successful that several other railroads in North America and other countries in the world have made their own Hudson type locomotives, and some are still around today in preservation, with a few still being in operational condition. Number 10. The Wabash P1s. Rebuilt from the unsuccessful 3-cylinder K4 and K5 Mikados, there were just 7 of these Hudsons rebuilt from 1943 to 1947. The engines were semi-streamlined, with long elephant-eared smoke deflectors and painted blue with a broad white stripe trimmed in red down the side of the locomotives. And on the steam dome, the tenders received a similar paint job. The locomotive's number was painted on the tender, and in later years, the flag logo was applied to the deflectors. The engines were numbered 700 to 706 and ran until dieselization took over their assignments in 1956, and all of the P1s were scrapped, with none to spare for preservation. Number 9. The Frisco 1060 class. Who would have known that the Frisco would have Hudsons? Anyways, 10 of these locomotives were built in 1917, but not as factory-fresh Hudsons. They were originally built as 462 Pacific type locomotives, and they were fine, but they initially had firebox problems, which is not good, no, yeah. As a result, in 1937, the Frisco decided to rebuild all of them into 464 Hudson types to solve their firebox problems, albeit with an additional trailing axle to accommodate their now larger firebox. The 1060 class in their new form continued in passenger service, and some of them were even semi-streamlined with side skirting. However, just like the P1s in the last part, the 1060s did not last forever in their Hudson configuration, as after World War II, the Frisco was now heavily invested in diesel traction. All of the 1060 locomotives were retired by 1952, when steam on Frisco as a whole ended, and just like the P1s, all of these rebuilt Hudsons were all cut up. None were preserved. Number 8. Nickel Plate Road Class L1s. Built in 1927, the same year as the New York Central J1 and Santa Fe 3450 class, there were a total of 8 L1 Hudson built for the Nickel Plate Road. The first 4 classified as L1As were numbered 170 to 174 and were built by Alco, or the American Locomotive Company, in 1927, while the later ones, numbered 175 to 177, were built by Lima in 1929. They were the backbone of the Nickel Plate Road passenger service, despite the Nickel Plate Road technically not being a major passenger carrier, alongside their somewhat forgotten 462 Pacifics, but the L1 were also occasionally used on freight duties. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think only the Nickel Plate Road L1s and the Canadian Pacific Hudsons were the only Hudsons used on freight. Correct me if I'm wrong, but whatever. Yeah, they were sometimes used on freight trains, either on solo or even double hitting with the 284 Berkshires, and later on these Hudsons were fitted with elephant-eared smoke deflectors, which make them quite elegant, like a smaller, shrunk-down version of the Union Pacific FEF Northerns. However, their time on passenger duties wouldn't last long, as diesel would take over in 1947. However, they continued in freight service like usual until retirements occurred in the 1950s, and all but one were scrapped. The sole exception being the prototype number 170, which was later donated to the Museum of Transportation in St. Louis, Missouri, which she is on static display as of right now. However, there have been some considerations of restoring 170 to operational condition, but concerns of how much the engine can pull, and the biggest problem being its boiler, which was found to be too thin. As a result, 170 continued to be on display. Whether or not she'll run again is up to anyone. If 170 was to run again, it would need a new boiler and etc. But one can dream. Maybe one day. Just maybe. Number 7. Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western 1151 or M1 class. A total of 5 of these Hudsons were built in 1937 by the American Locomotive Company or ALCO in order to improve the Lackawanna Express passenger service west of Scranton, Pennsylvania, towards Buffalo, New York, apart from a 6-mile helper district just west of Scranton and Dansville Hill between Groveland and Perkinsville, New York. This was a flat high-speed running on the railroad. Already existing 482 mountain types were proving increasingly inadequate for this service as the train length increased and because of the drag of air conditioning equipment. However, their already existing 484 Poconos, which is just what they happen to call their Northerns, were bigger and more powerful than this service required, and such use would be wasteful. Therefore, the Lackawanna ordered 5 powerful 464 Hudson types dedicated for this service. They were the only Lackawanna locomotives dedicated for flatland service. They had driving wheels up to 80 inches, which were the largest used on the Lackawanna. Strangely, they weren't equipped with a booster, which is strange for a Hudson, I think. Instead, relying on their starting tractive effort of 52,790 pounds force. While not quite equal to the mountain types they replaced, their available power at speed was far greater. They were built alongside the New York Central J3A Hudsons at Alco's Schenectady plant, which differed in being less powerful and booster equipped, as well as being equipped with tenders with water scoops for track pans. The Lackawanna does not have these. The two classes had somewhat close total weights and axle loading and bore a superficial resemblance to one another. To keep all the Lackawanna 6-driver to passenger power together in the 11XX number series, the new locomotives were numbered 1151 to 1155, taking the place of several Pacifics that had been recently converted into 080 switchers. These Hudson only lasted 10 years in their original intended assignments, since the Lackawanna dieselized its express passenger trains in 1947. These Hudsons were relegated to lesser assignments such as commuter trains, but just like the 1060 and P1, the diesel would completely replace steam. And all 5 of the 1151 or M1 class Hudsons were retired between 1951 to 1953. And all were sadly scrapped, as with the case of almost every single Lackawanna steam locomotive. To be honest, this is one extinct class of steam locomotives that I would like to see preserved. It's just that tractive effort of 52,790 pounds that throw me off, since most Hudsons have tractive effort of around the 40,000 to 49,000 pound mark. But, Number 6. Canadian National K5A class. Amongst the fleet of 484, 482, and etc., there were just 5 of these Hudson types numbered 5700 to 5704 built in 1930 by the Montreal Locomotive Works, and unlike its main rival Canadian Pacific, the Canadian National wasn't too crazy about the 464 and only bought 484 Northern types from that point on. Despite this, the last K5A wasn't retired until 1967, like 7 years after the last American railroad gave up steam. Anyways, the K5A were assigned to various CN passenger trains, like the one between London, Taunton, and what was the other one called? I forgot. And they did the job pretty well. but when the class was being sold for scrap, the Canadian National decided to preserve the class leader, number 5700. However, there was a mix in communication regarding 5700 status, and the locomotive was unfortunately scrapped. CN, realizing this, saved a different K5A, number 5703, and renumbered it to 5700. Another one, number 5702, was also spared, and both are now on static display. Whether or not these two will run again is up for debate. But, just like with the L1s of the nickel plate, one can dream. Okay guys, so I'm gonna pause the video right now because I have decided that this is part 1 and I'll be making part 2 the next year at some point. So yeah, that's it for part 1. So see you next time, and of course, as always, stay safe and be nice to people. And anyways, have a nice day, bye, and also to be continued.